far, we've seen how participatory systems mapping helps build shared understanding. Now the question is, what happens next? How do these shared understandings actually lead to action? And what can mapping realistically enable or not enable? Throughout this unit, we will explore what participatory systems mapping actually enables in practice, how to move from shared understanding to coordinated action, and what the key limitations of participatory systems mapping are. So, what does systems mapping actually enable? As we saw in Unit 2, it can be used in 3 ways. As a tool, it supports individual insights. As an event, it creates group alignment. But as a process, it can enable coordination across actors and scales. And it is really in this third form, as a process, that mapping becomes most powerful, but also more complex to use. If you recall from Unit 1, at the core of this process are 2 complementary activities. First, sense-making, building a shared understanding of the current system. Second, envisioning, exploring how the system could evolve differently. These 2 activities are grounded in 2 maps, a problem map and an actor map. Together, they help participants move from understanding a system to thinking about how it could change. So in practice, why is this useful? First, participants can target multiple, even conflicting goals. Across the emphasis cases, the most effective strategies did not focus on a single objective. Instead, they combined goals. For example, improving soil health or biodiversity, while maintaining farmer income or reducing input costs. You might reflect here, in your own work, are goals treated separately or as interconnected? Second, mapping helps identify ripple effects, when an intervention in one part of the system triggers indirect effects elsewhere. Intentionally targeting ripple effects allows change to propagate through the system. For example, in emphasis, stakeholders discussed how changes in farming practices can affect not only environmental outcomes, but also market dynamics, labor needs, or advisory services, or how policy incentives may influence farmer behavior, but also supply chain actors and investment decisions. Third, mapping helps anticipate unintended consequences. Because food systems are interconnected, actions in one part of the system can create effects elsewhere. Market-oriented strategies may improve profitability, but can also exclude smaller farmers. Policy incentives can shift behavior, but may create new dependencies. Mapping makes these potential side effects visible early on. This is critical, as sometimes interventions fail because their broader effects were not anticipated. Fourth, mapping helps identify and deal with systems lock-ins. In many emphasis cases, change was constrained by existing structures. For example, subsidies or market incentives reinforcing unsustainable practices, or farmers' reluctance to change due to risk and uncertainty. And finally, mapping supports coordination across actors. For example, in Switzerland, linking financial support to quality standards helped align farmer behavior with policy goals. More broadly, many strategies required coordination between farmers, policymakers, businesses, and intermediaries. So no single actor can drive change alone. Participatory mapping helps actors see how their actions are interconnected and where coordination is needed. So to summarize, participatory systems mapping can support 5 key types of actions: targeting multiple goals, generating ripple effects, anticipating unintended consequences, addressing system lock-ins, and enabling coordination across actors. This is not about how to draw maps, it's about how maps are used once they exist. This process helps actors prioritize, align, and make strategic decisions in complex systems. So mapping is not the end point, it is a starting point. The real question becomes, what happens after the map is created? Participatory systems mapping does not by itself create change. It builds a shared understanding of complex challenges. And transformation only begins when shared understanding translates into coordinated action. This does not happen in a single workshop. It happens through cycles of dialogue, action, and learning over time. Let's look at how this works in practice. In the fisheries case in rural Kenya, Participatory mapping was part of a broader process structured around the 4 cycles we introduced in Unit 2. First, sense-making. Stakeholders mapped challenges such as overfishing, unstable incomes, and lack of infrastructure. Second, envisioning. They explored alternative futures such as sustainable fishing practices or diversification into aquaculture. Third, experimenting. Actors began testing solutions in practice. And fourth, assessing. They reflected on what worked, what didn't, and what to adapt. These cycles repeated over time. Mapping, in this case, revealed key system dynamics. For example, overfishing linked to income insecurity, weak regulation, and limited alternative livelihoods. From this, stakeholders identified leverage points, and instead of designing one single solution, different actors took action in parallel. For example, some fishers tested more sustainable fishing practices, others explored small-scale aquaculture, NGOs supported training, and local authorities explored regulatory changes. So the map became a starting point for distributed action, rather than a fixed plan. One of the strongest effects of this process was coordination. Actors began to see how their actions were connected. Fishers saw how their practices affected long-term stocks. Traders understood how prices influenced production. Policymakers saw how regulations impacted livelihoods. This shared understanding enabled coordination, even without full agreement. Here, change was catalyzed by multiple experiments happening at the same time. Different actors tried different approaches, adapted them to their own contexts, and learned over time. This diversity increased the chances of finding what works. So rather than asking, what is the best solution, we might want to ask, what can different actors try, learn from, and adapt together? Let's now go back to emphasis. In this project, participatory systems mapping is used not only to understand local systems, but also to build pathways for change at a broader scale. We show how insights generated at local and regional levels can be brought together to inform EU-level transformations. This process happens in several steps. First, we started with case-specific co-design. We worked with stakeholders such as farmers, advisors, policymakers, businesses, and civil society to map their systems. Together, we identified key factors, actors, and dynamics enabling or constraining sustainable farming and food systems. This ensured that the maps are grounded in real-world experiences and diverse perspectives. Second, cross-case analysis. We compared cases to identify common patterns and mechanisms. We stepped back from individual cases to ask what challenges are shared, what mechanisms repeat across contexts, what drives or blocks change. This allowed to move from specific situations to more general insights. We then engaged in iterative learning. We refined insights by going back and forth between cases and analysis. The process was not linear. We refined the maps, questioned assumptions, and improved our understanding over time. We then conducted a validation process. Stakeholders and experts reviewed these outputs and provided critical and constructive feedback. Their input helped ensure that the outputs are credible, relevant, and grounded in practice. This led to the development of an EU-level theory of change. This is not a fixed plan, but a shared roadmap. It highlights leverage points, intervention, bundles, and pathways for coordinated action across actors and levels. The strength of this approach lies in combining grounded, participatory insights from local contexts with system-level analysis and strategic thinking at EU level. It enables a shift from fragmented knowledge to a more integrated systemic understanding and from isolated initiatives to coordinated transformation pathways. At the same time, it is important to recognize its limits. Because the EU-level synthesis is not fully co-designed, it requires ongoing dialogue, validation, and adaptation. Ultimately, the goal is to support experimentation and coordinated action. By sharing this theory of change with decision-makers and stakeholders, we aim to inform policies, strategies, and collaborations that can accelerate the transition towards sustainable farming and food systems across Europe. Now, think about what this means for your own work. Participatory systems mapping becomes powerful when embedded in a broader process. Maps help build understanding. but transformation happens through action, experimentation, and learning over time. Mapping supports alignment, but it does not implement change. The map is a platform for dialogue, not a solution in itself. At the same time, participatory systems mapping has important limitations. Maps are not objective reality and universal truth. They are shaped by who is in the room. They reflect perspectives, assumptions, and power dynamics. This subjectivity is not necessarily a problem, but it needs to be recognized. Other limitations include mapping does not guarantee action. It can reproduce power imbalances, and it can lead to overload or analysis paralysis. To conclude, participatory systems mapping is not a solution in itself. It is an infrastructure for learning, dialogue, and coordination. Its value depends less on the map and more on how the process is facilitated and how it connects to action. To conclude on this module, to foster alignment and ownership, a few practices are key. To create the map, include diverse perspectives, make assumptions explicit, iterate over time, and always link mapping to concrete actions. Because in the end, maps do not change systems. People do when they act, learn, and adapt together.